Hello everyone, in today's video I will be narrating stories that I found off of Reddit. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But without further ado,
let's get straight into these stories.
So this happened to me when I was 11 or 12 years old, over a decade ago, and I still remember it vividly. At the time I lived in a semi-detached house with my mom, dad, and sibling. It was decent sized, but the most impressive part was the garden, which essentially had 3 levels. The first level was concrete, the second grass, and the third, also grass, had my trampoline on it. At the very end of the garden was a tree embankment. The area I lived in was somewhat hilly. One morning I woke up to a cracking sound, like a snapped branch, and I was worried since a week earlier a tree from the embankment had fallen into our neighbor's garden. My bedroom was at the back of the house overlooking the garden, so I opened the curtains to see if another tree had fallen. Instead, I saw a guy hiding in one of the trees in the garden. He was pale with blonde hair and wearing all black clothing. He was looking directly at me, presumably because he saw the curtains move. He started sparking and moved his finger in a come here motion. I totally freaked out and shouted for my mom and dad to come into my room. I was so scared I physically felt like I couldn't move. This was super early in the morning, by the way, around maybe 5. So it took my dad a good 30 seconds to get in my room, at which point the stranger had hid behind the trees. I remember being really shaken up. I was crying whilst I told my dad what happened. He went out into the back garden to see if he could spot the guy, but he was gone by that point. A bit of time passed and I'd started to forget about it. Then about 3 months after, my mom and I were watching television together after I'd finished school. The doorbell rang and my mom went to answer the door. I looked out the window of the living room where we were sat and saw a white van parked outside. It was the same van as my uncle's, so I walked out of the living room and into the hallway to greet him. When I got to the porch where my mom was stood, I realized it wasn't my uncle. It was the same guy I had seen in the garden a few months prior, and it really freaked me out. He noticed me as I walked behind my mom and gave me the same smirk as when he was in the garden. I wanted to say something to my mom, but I couldn't. I was freaking out inside. Anyway, he just asked my mom if she wanted work done on the drive. She said no, and he left, got back in the van, and drove off. He didn't give her a business card or anything. The van didn't have any company branding, and he didn't knock on any of the neighbors' doors. I told my mom that it was the same guy as soon as he went, and she started to feel uneasy about the situation too. A month or so after that, I got my first job doing the paper round. I had to deliver over 300 papers with my best friend at the time. It was getting towards winter and it was dark by 4:30 in the afternoon. We'd been doing the job together for around a month when the one evening after school it was super dark and rainy. We were halfway through delivering the newspapers and a van started following us, driving really slow at the same pace we were walking. We clocked that it was following us after about a minute, and we started to panic as I noticed it was the same guy again. We left the newspaper trolley and started walking quite fast up the hill. We were about a 10-minute walk from my house. I rang my mom, who made me stay on the line while she left the house to meet us. She told us to go to the corner shop that we were about a minute away from. When we made it to the shop, the van sped off really fast. The police were called, who came to my house for a report. We told them everything. That was the last time I ever saw the creepy stranger, but I still remember what he looked like so vividly. Hi, me, my sister, and my mom have been trying to make sense of this for the past couple of hours, and the facts get less comforting the more we compare our experiences of that night. So last Friday night, I, a 17-year-old dude, was home alone while my family, besides my sister who is 21 who was at work, stayed in their cabin a few kilometers away. I'm used to staying home alone as this exact scenario is very common in the summertime, especially while I'm working and can't travel from the cabin and back. I'm not usually jumpy or afraid while home alone anymore, used to the odd creaks and settling noises of our old house. I was especially comforted by the fact that my sister's dog was also in the house with me that night, and most noises could be attributed to him, and if anything were to happen he would act as a guard dog of sorts and alert me to anything odd. At the same time, however, he is the type of dog to bark at any noise or person walking past the door or windows, so I'm used to hearing him bark or growl at night. Even so, this past Friday the sound of his barks at nearly 12 in the morning were disconcerting, to say the least. Despite my comfort with staying home alone, I am still terrified of the premise of a break-in or some other uninvited human interaction at midnight. I let him bark for a few seconds, telling myself it was just someone walking past our glass door in the adjacent alleyway, and he would quiet down once they passed. Needless to say, that's not what happened. He kept barking and growling for a few moments too long, and I finally got out of bed. I sleep in the basement. I walked upstairs to check it out, as I'd suspected he was standing alert at the glass door. I was comforted for a moment until I walked over, ready to close the curtains and go back to sleep, and saw the door door open about 2 or 3 inches. I froze. I had let Bosco, the dog, out earlier that night, but I know I closed the door. I have never left this door open. I am a paranoid person with bad anxiety, especially concerning break-ins and the like, so I would never, home alone, forget to close the door. I am 100% certain. But at the time, I didn't let myself think about these facts or even acknowledge that I could not have left the door open, because I knew it would send me into a spiral, possibly even an anxiety/panic attack if I didn't explain this away. I closed and locked the door, double checking that it was certainly locked. Using the flashlight on my phone, the lights were all off. I looked around the entire second floor of my 3-floor house, including closets and other reasonable hiding spots just to put my mind at ease upon finding nothing. Went back downstairs to my room. As I was down there, trying to push away the fear, I could hear Bosco walking around on the floor that doubles as my bedroom's roof. I thought I was overthinking it when it started to sound like human footsteps accompanied by Bosco's footsteps. He walks around for about 10 minutes before I put in my earphones and talk myself down until I can fall asleep. At 2 in the morning that same night, my sister comes home from work. I woke up a few minutes before this to Bosco in the basement, which he never does. There's even a gate to stop him from getting to the basement. Bosco is whining at my bedroom door. When I got up to let him out, my sister walked in, and we let him out the front door rather than the glass patio door, letting him in the same way. We talked for a while before I went back downstairs and my sister went to the bathroom. I forgot about the door, busy with work for the next few days, and forgot to mention it to anyone until tonight. My sister and mom were home with me for a movie night while my dad and brothers stay at the cabin. I remember the door situation when we were picking out horror movies to watch. I was sharing it as a creepy, almost funny story before my sister spoke up, saying that the same night, an hour or so after they got home, the door was open again, the same door that was locked from the inside and not open since earlier that night. My stomach dropped and I started shaking the second this was revealed. We first started trying to explain it away. Maybe she had let Bosco out and forgot to close it until we both recalled that we'd used the front door. Then we were trying to justify a reason someone would break in to not steal anything and proceed to stay for 2 hours before leaving. Ultimately, I realized that I quite possibly locked someone in the house with me, then forced them to hide upstairs while I searched the second level of our house. Then this hypothetical person would be trapped up there now knowing that this house, that appears empty with the rest of my family gone and all the lights off, was not empty, and there was a dog who would bark if they showed themselves again, alerting me to their presence. Then, when I was in the basement and my sister was in the bathroom, they ran out the glass door, which is timed perfectly to when they found the door open once more, much wider than when I found it, as though they were only in a hurry on the way out. Perhaps they left it open the first time for a quick escape, or to stop the loud sound of it meeting the door frame. Either way, it ties together too perfectly for me to reasonably brush it off. I know it's unlikely, especially with nothing missing, but in this small town, there have been many reports of break-ins with nothing missing, vandalizing, or just breaking and entering many times, so it's not as unlikely as it may be in a bigger city. I can't make sense of this, and I'm shaken up thinking of the possibility of someone being in my house while I was asleep, alone in the basement. There's a part of me that doesn't believe it, but I can't shake the too many coincidences that all tie together to make this as concerning as it is. I certainly am glad that my searching came up empty that night, and I did not meet this person face to face. In the summer of 2020, my friends, Alex and Violet, and I decided to go on a mountain vacation. Pandemic cabin fever had hit us hard and we were desperate to get out. We settled on a mountain estate and planned to camp and hike at several different locations. For one night, we thought it would be fun to book a cabin in the woods. Violet's parents had rented a fire tower once and loved it, but a cabin beside a fire tower was all we could find. It was cheap, clean, and secluded. Excited to have a night where we could be as obnoxious as we wanted, we booked it. In the weeks leading up to the trip, we decided it would be a great idea to drop acid at the cabin. Violet bought an entire sheet in preparation for our arrival, and it was tucked in her bag as we pulled out of the driveway to make our way to the cabin. I remember this knot in the pit of my stomach, this achy feeling that gnawed at me. I told Alex and Violet that there was no way we could drop acid that night. Violet was pissed. We turned around and got into a massive argument, but I stood my ground. I just knew that we had no business tripping that night. Finally, the fireworks settled and we were off. The cabin was roughly 30 minutes away from the nearest town. It sat atop a mountain. We held our breath as we rounded the busted road that spiraled toward the top. There were no pull-offs, no other campsites, just a long, windy road that led us to the cabin at the peak. We settled in and started a fire to keep warm. As dusk gave way to night, we heard the unmistakable noise of an engine on the road, then the flash of headlights. A side-by-side with 3 kids arrived and our nerves settled. They smiled, gave us a wave, climbed the fire tower, and left. We'd heard there may be occasional visitors to the fire tower, but they were the only ones who'd come come by. We doused the fire and moved inside, heated some hot dogs until they were lukewarm, ate them fast, and sat in the silence. You don't know how quiet it is until you're in the middle of nowhere. You can hear every rustle of the leaves, the whisper of the wind through their branches. You get so used to white noise. Living in the city, there's always the hum of an air conditioner or the dim roar of traffic to focus on. Here, the closest thing to white noise was the sound of our own breathing. We jumped at every noise, too frightened to speak to one another, and finally, I'd had enough. I cracked a few wine coolers, passed them to Alex and Violet, and slapped a board game down on the table between our bunk beds. It didn't take long for us to loosen, and we were laughing, having the raucous good time we'd envisioned. Much soberer than we thought, but enough that we were able to ignore the rumble of the woods. Later, we'd all recall hearing noises in the background. The snap of a twig, the dim rumble of an engine. None of us wanted to rupture the air of nonchalance between us, so we ignored it, until a human hand reached up to the window between us and slapped it 3 times. We were screaming in an instant. Alex called the cops, put them on speakerphone, and handed his cell to me. He grabbed pokers from the fireplace and passed them out. Violet started calling family members and saying her last goodbyes. I held my breath and listened for any more noise. Whoever this was, whatever this was, would have heard us call the police, and now they were being careful to make a silent retreat. Dispatch arrived 20 minutes later, a lucky thing for a 1 in the morning emergency call, and had their dogs comb the mountain. Nothing. They suggested it may have been a bear, but I could tell from their faces that they didn't believe that for a second. We barely cooked those hot dogs, and why would a bear smack the window by a couple of screaming kids rather than the one closest to the pan we'd used to cook? Why would a bear knock on the window like a human? Why, when we screamed, did the bear make a stealthy retreat? They had no answers, but they had one anecdote. As they'd sped to us, they'd come across a car at the base of the mountain, but that was the only sign of life they'd seen. I remember my blood ran cold, but Violet and Alex were too frazzled to absorb the weight of what they'd said. And dizzied by a new horror, Violet's car, thoroughly dusted by our drive up the mountain, was covered in handprints. Handprints that didn't match ours, that touched places we hadn't. We grabbed our stuff by the armful and threw it inside, eager to remove every part of ourselves from this mountain. We followed the police, grateful every pothole found us further and further from that wretched cabin. We made it down in record time and found lodging at a seedy hotel that reeked of cat urine. I couldn't sleep. The thought of that car on the road rang in my head. Remember, there was nothing else on that mountain. It was a narrow road to the top. No pull-offs, no other campsites. There was the fire tower. Maybe a visitor decided to spook us during their late night excursion. But the kids from earlier, we'd seen their headlights. Whoever did this had stopped their vehicle further down the road and hiked the rest of the way. They didn't want to be spotted. They wanted silence, secrecy. Whoever this was hadn't been looking for a cheap scare. They planned this. I don't think I'll ever know what the person on the mountain wanted from me. I don't know if it was a practical joke or the beginning of a night of terror. I'm grateful for Alex's quick wit in calling the police. I wonder if our visitor knew we had service. It had certainly been a welcome surprise to us. Perhaps that was a wrench in his plan, enough to spook him before he could make things ugly. In truth, I don't know if I want to know. I think I'm just content to say, midnight stranger, let's not meet. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. At the time of this story, I was 21 and living in a major Midwestern city, attending the university there. Having lived there for only 1 month before my story began, I had witnessed a train stop stabbing, been yelled at by a crackhead, had a homeless guy followed me and threatened to choke me outside the physics building on campus, and watched a 13-car cop raid on a drug house just across the street. The area around the university is known for being rough and has a notoriously high rate of crime. We would get a few texts a week from the campus police saying things like there had been a robbery, a break-in, an assault, stalkings, attempted kidnappings. That stuff. I always ignored these texts, thinking foolishly that I would never be a victim because I was quote-unquote smart enough to stay out of trouble, not go out alone late at night. All the cliches. I seriously regret this behavior now, and to anyone listening to this, please never think that you're 100% safe, no matter your level of preparedness. Always do your best to stay observant and careful. The first incident wasn't too unusual. I was just a block or two from my apartment building one day in the early evening. It was still light outside. I was walking my dog Sesame, a cute Shiba Inu who just looks like a fluffy goofy puppy and has never been frightening or particularly protective in his life. As I was heading back home, I passed a small parking lot and in a large van. I could see a man in his early 60s sitting in the driver's seat smoking a cigarette. He was staring at me. As I passed, he actually leaned out of his car and called out to me, "Hey, you there? That's a cute dog. What's his name?" I should mention this isn't even my first story like this. I have a pretty intense fear of strangers because of other incidents in my life. Being pretty wary for this reason, I ignored him and just walked faster. I heard a car door shut behind me and turned quickly to see that he had gotten out of his van and was slowly walking toward me. He called out to me again, "Hey, baby, I just want to see your dog. Come back." His phrasing pissed me off, and I gripped my dog's leash and started to speed walk away from him, starting to feel nervous. My heart was beginning to pound, but I kept telling myself over and over that I was overreacting and it was just my paranoia acting up and there was nothing to worry about. Boy, was I wrong. I managed to turn the corner and was about to cross the final park before getting to my apartment. In my fear over the van guy, I wasn't paying attention as much as I usually do to what was in front of me. I looked back over my shoulder and the guy had stopped following me. He was, however, standing in the middle of the sidewalk with a huge creepy grin on his face. I whirled back around with my eyes glued to my building. I only needed to walk another half a block and I'd be home. I was going to get away from him and his creepy van. Just when I thought I was safe, a group of 5 or 6 men came from the side of the park I wasn't watching. They were all tall and intimidating in stature and all of them were laughing and looking right at me. Out of the corner of my eye, the van guy had started walking towards me as well. I remember he was whistling. I again picked up my pace and desperately searched for my keys in my pocket as I hurried to the door. The group of men then veered towards me, partially cutting me off, and in all my stupid politeness I stopped. They grinned at me with sick, perverted smiles, obviously checking me out. Looking up and down my body, it made me sick. I tried not to panic and inched closer to my apartment. "Hey, what's your name? Where are you going? What's your Snapchat? Is that your apartment? Can we come over? Do you smoke?" They all barraged me with questions one after another. I tried to refuse them, stammering no thank you. I saw the van guy come and join their group, leering at me. While I inched away, they inched closer. One of them then reached out for me, his fingers actually touching my arm. I leapt back, trying not to start crying, but Sesame suddenly lunged at them, his teeth bared, a horrifying snarl ripping from his throat. Every bit of cute Shiba personality was gone, and he looked like he was wanted to tear one of these guys' throats out. It startled them enough that I was able to turn and sprint the final distance to my building, locking the door behind me. I fell to the floor inside my building, hugging Sesame. However, the entire front of my building was glass, and to my horror and disbelief the group of men came and stood in front of the windows, grinning at me, laughing, and making kissy faces and lewd gestures at me. The apartment manager came out and called the cops on them, but they ran away. I made it back home and scrubbed myself in the shower, crying and shaking with fear. Sesame got a special dinner that evening, and I kept telling myself that they just wanted to mess with me and I was never in any real danger. Stupid of me, I know now. About a month later, when I had finally managed to be able to walk outside my apartment without severe anxiety, I was actually planning on moving a bit farther away from campus. It was still going to be in a sketchy neighborhood, but the thought of those men knowing where I lived kept me up at night. My apartment actually hired a security guard to be there 24/7 after someone had broken into the building, smashed all the windows, destroyed some of the furniture, and stolen a bunch of bikes. Of course, my bike got stolen anyways. I was heading home from class, and it was a beautiful day. I actually felt pretty happy for once and popped my earbuds in on the last few blocks before I got home. Stupid, I know. After a block or so, I started to feel like someone was watching me. My palms started sweaty. I glanced behind me, trying not to look obvious, and a tall man was about 20 feet behind me, staring straight at me. I snapped my head back around and ripped out my earbuds. Though, I thought, it can't be one of them. I was just jumping to conclusions given my anxiety disorder and paranoia surely, but there was something familiar about him. My heart started racing, as I hoped to God the others weren't waiting for me around the corner of my building, ready to jump me. I walked faster, wishing Sesame was with me. I was too afraid to look back at him as I fumbled with my keys and wrenched the door open as hard as I could. This turned out to be a crucial mistake. As I ran to the elevator, trying to breathe a sigh of relief, I saw with absolute horror that the man had caught the door I had thrown wide open and was slowly coming into the building with me. He paused, standing away from me, but close enough that I could hear his ragged breathing and smell of alcohol coming off him. My heart was thudding in my chest now, and I struggled to think clearly. The apartment manager was already home for the day, and I was completely alone in the lobby. There were no other doors out of that room, and a stranger was blocking my way to the door. The security guard supposed to be keeping an eye on the building was nowhere to be seen. The elevator came, and I tried to run into it and slam my hand over the door close button as fast as I could. I pushed my floor button and huddled in the far corner of the elevator. I started to once again try to catch my breath, but right when the door was almost closed, he stuck his hand in. I couldn't believe it. He waited until the door was just about to close, and then he stopped it. He was standing close enough enough that there was no way that was a mistake. My stomach dropped and a suffocating sense of dread crept in. I kept my head down as he joined me. My desperate hope that he was just a dirty Druka resident of the building was dashed when he didn't press any buttons. I don't know why I didn't run out of the elevator or try to leave the building again. I was paralyzed with fear and all I could do was watch as the door closed and sealed my fate. The elevator was filled with the stench of alcohol and body odor. If I wasn't so terrified I may have gagged. It was nauseating. I couldn't look at it. I couldn't move. I tried to scream at myself in my head to press the wrong button and try to escape him, but I was completely petrified. He leaned closer to me and I heard him breathe in deeply and very quietly sigh like he was content. I felt tears well in my eyes and the seconds it took to reach the top floor where I lived felt like hours. I saw no way I could escape the sick, drunk guy who was smelling me. In the reflection of the elevator walls I could make out his disgusting smile. He was staring directly at me, his hands in his pockets, clearly holding onto something. I'm not religious, but I prayed that I would make it to my door in time. I realized he probably wasn't going to attack me in the elevator. There was a large camera in the ceiling. I looked up at it, feeling a tear spill out of my eye as I did so, hoping that whoever saw the tape eventually would identify this man. The worst part of all of this is that I've trained in martial arts and self-defense since I was about 8 years old. I thought of myself as stronger and braver than I was acting. I should know what to do. I should be strong enough to do it. But no matter how many times I had disarmed, thrown, or choked out attackers in the studio, nothing totally prepares you for the dread of a real-life situation. As the elevator reached my floor, I managed to snap out of my stupor long enough to dash through the door and run to my apartment unit. I nearly missed the keyhole, but I threw open my door. I was nearly through when my backpack snagged on the outside handle of the door, trapping me. I heard the man walking quickly to my door, a low chuckle building in his throat as he watched me panic and struggle to get free. I felt like a mouse being watched by a cat, trapped and helpless, so close to escaping. I finally gave up and shoved my arms through the straps, abandoning my backpack. As I did so, the man suddenly reached out for me. I was able to slam the door shut, deadbolting it. The gust of air from the door slamming brought his disgusting smell in with me, and in my terror and disgust I retched violently. I looked through the peephole. He was staring right at me, pressing his forehead against the door, his mouth bent in a furious scowl. He swore at me and ripped my backpack off the handle of the door, slamming it to the ground. I winced as I heard my laptop thud. I was still too terrified to say anything, but I grabbed the knife I kept by my door in my hand, ready if he tried anything. After a few minutes of staring at my door, jiggling the handle, licking the peephole, and making obscene motions at it, he unzipped my backpack, dumping its contents on the floor. He picked up my bag, sniffing it and leering at the peephole as he did so, like he knew I was watching him. I couldn't look away, again paralyzed in fear. Finally he left, using the elevator visible from my door like nothing had happened. I continued to stare out the peephole for what felt like an eternity, and then finally called the apartment manager, feeling my anger sinking and that the security guard hadn't been anywhere in sight, not paying attention. It turns out he had fallen asleep eating Taco Bell and watching movies on his phone. He was only 10 feet away from the elevator the entire time, sleeping in the office behind a closed door. They fired him, but the creepy guy was never caught, and neither were any of the others. I don't even know for sure if this man was part of the original group. I was honestly too terrified to look much at their faces during the first incident. I moved out of my apartment a week later, staying with my boyfriend at the time for the remainder of my lease, and keeping Sesame with me at all times when possible. A few more things happened while I lived in that city, from having to call in a gunfight from outside my new apartment window, to having to pick up my friend who was being followed by a van, to having to evacuate during an arson incident. There are nice things about that city too, but during my time there, besides learning the police department was absolutely useless and corrupt, to nearly escaping with my life multiple times, I couldn't be happier to be far, far away from there, and doing a lot better with my fear and anxiety. I want to start by saying that this isn't the first bad experience I've had dog sitting, but it's definitely the worst. So I started dog sitting back when I was 13 and made good money doing it. I'm currently 19 and this happened when I was 18. I set up an easy way for people to contact me about dog sitting. I put out a post on Facebook and Instagram about it often and would get people in my messages asking to dog sit. I got a notification from Instagram one day stating someone was trying to message me. I accepted it and the message said that me and my wife are looking to find a dog sitter while we go away for a week to Florida. You will have to work the 4th to the 11th this month. We will pay you $300 for the week. You're welcome to stay at our house or go back to your own home. I started talking back and forth with this man and we're gonna call him Mr. Brown for the sake of privacy. So I agreed to take the gig and told him I would stay at his house for the week. Once I got to his house, I was introduced to his two dogs, Mina and Letty. Mina was a little Yorkie and Letty was a blue hound. I was shown around his house, which was surrounded by 76 acres. I live in a farm town and live on 32 acres coworkers myself, so staying here didn't really freak me out. The closest neighbors were pretty far away and you would actually have to drive there if you wanted to talk to them. They told me the rules and when to feed them, stuff like that. Then Mrs. Brown told me about the nearest neighbor. In her words, she was a nice person, just a little drugged up and confused. She mentioned how sometimes she would pull into their driveway instead of hers and would end up mistaking Mrs. Brown for her dead daughter. Hearing this made me feel pretty bad for her, and I know all too well how hard it is for parents to lose their child because of how my parents were after losing my brother in a car accident. Mrs. Brown said she shouldn't do anything bad though, and if she came up to the house, just point her back home and she should leave with no problems. After they left, I was down to watch movies and just chill with the dogs. The first 2 days were fine with no hiccups. The third day, however, the old woman who I'll call Ms. Rose did pull into the driveway. I came outside as she was getting out of the car. She looked up to see me and immediately she got back in her car and left. I chalked it up to her realizing it was the wrong house when she saw me and went back inside. Later that night though, I got a call from Mrs. Brown asking if I was okay. I said yes and asked why. She then went on to tell me about how she got a call from Ms. Rose and that she said there was a robber at their house. I explained what happened and she just laughed and said she must have been confused and forgot that they were out of town. I ended the phone call making a note to go over there tomorrow to clear the air about me being a robber. Once I went to bed that night though, things got crazy. I woke up at around 2 in the morning hearing a light scratching sound that almost sounded like ticking coming from outside the window. At first I thought it might have been a bird or some sort of night creature and left it alone, but as the noise kept me from falling back asleep, I wanted to scare it away, so I got up and went to open the blinds but screamed when I lifted the blinds at the sight of Ms. Rose trying to pry the window open with a pair of pliers. Once she saw me though, she started banging on the window with the pliers. The dogs started barking now and I quickly got up, told the dogs to follow me, grabbed my phone and ran to a room with no windows, which was the bathroom. I locked the door in case she got in. I called the cops and explained the situation, quickly giving them the address from what I could remember. She said that police would be there in 10 minutes, which for the area I was in is pretty good considering their house is in a pretty rural area. I had gotten the dogs to be quiet and put them in the closet connected to the bathroom to make sure she didn't hear them. I was trying to stay calm and I could still hear the pounding on the window as I continued to talk to the operator, and then I heard glass shatter. I cursed under my breath trying not to cry. I was really scared and pretty much ready to cry from the fear of being beaten to death by someone who was clearly not in the right state of mind. I was whispering what was happening to the operator hiding in the back of the bathroom in the tub. After about 4 minutes of pretty much silence, I heard footsteps and I could see feet under the other side of the door, and I cursed to myself again. I then see Ms. Rose get on her hands looking under the crack and I mistakenly let out a gasp. She gets up quickly pounding at the door. I can tell she's still using the pliers. I am at this point crying, asking the operator where the police are, to which she responds 3 minutes. Those 3 minutes felt like forever. I screamed at Ms. Rose to please go away and she screamed back that I shouldn't be here. Once I heard the sound of police cars and about a minute later of them trying to kick the door down though, I felt a little better. I was told to stay on the line until the intruder was caught and that police were not trying to get into the house. Eventually they did get into the house and I yelled to get their attention, not that they needed it. She was still banging on the door. Once they got into the room, she was told to drop her weapon and she obeyed, saying she didn't do anything wrong. They got her in cuffs and a police officer told me it was okay to unlock the door, to which I slowly got up and unlocked the door. After being taken to the police station and giving them my story for their report, I went to my parents' house. I was just too scared to be alone. The next day I called Mrs. Brown and explained the situation. I got full payment even after telling them I wasn't going back to the house. They called me a few days later saying that Ms. Rose was under the influence of drugs, and in her words she told the police she decided to take care of the robber, which was me, herself, and that she did nothing wrong. She was charged with breaking and entry, which is kind of ironic. After that I quit dog sitting and I am a lot more paranoid and always make sure my doors and windows are locked. So Ms. Rose, let's not meet again. This happened years ago. I was walking through the hills of a provincial park with my dog during winter, so the sun set much faster than I expected and before I could get back to my car. Once the sun was gone and all you could see was darkness, I was walking slowly through a field when out of nowhere I had, to this day, the most gut-wrenching, undeniable feeling I was being watched. I turned around, and in the distance, I saw a figure standing there, darker than the night sky around us. The instant I saw him, my stomach dropped and my body literally froze. I knew at that moment, somehow, he was coming for me. I grabbed my dog's leash and we booked it. I mean sprinting, full speed, up and down hills, around trees, down embankments. I was running so fast as if my life was dependent on it, and to this day I'm sure it was. I make the 30 to 45 minute trip in 10, and all that stands before me in my car is this switchback you have to go back and forth up if you want to reach the top. So once again, I am giving it all I got, running up this switchback as fast as I possibly can, and once I reach the top and look back down, who else but this person chasing me? And as he go up the switchback, back like how any sane person would. Of course not. He starts sprinting right up the middle of this switchback, headed straight for me. I scream at him, screw off, and he doesn't say anything, not a single word, just continues running right at me. I am so lucky my car was at the top of that hill, because as I ran towards it, I dropped my keys and are fiddling with him trying to open the door. Just in time, I get the door open, throw my dog in and shut the door behind me just as this guy reaches us. Best part is, there were no other vehicles parked anywhere around us, but where did this person park? Yeah, right next to me, of all places. Now this guy literally jumps into his truck so fast, and to this day I have never seen a better example of speeds out of there like a bear on cocaine. He guns the engine so hard, black smoke is blasting out the back as he swerves out of there, leaving skid marks behind him. I sat in the back of my vehicle for hours afterwards, shaking and crying, knowing I was this close to whatever he had planned for me. And that's why I'm sharing this story, in hopes that people won't ignore that gut feeling, the little voice in the back of your head that tells you to run. If I did that day, I never would have noticed him in time, and would not have had the head start I needed to escape. Always trust your gut feelings and intuition. It might really be the deciding factor in if this is your final day on Earth or not. Alright, but that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But as always,
Have a nice day.